Hi everyone, it's October 7th, 2018, and my name is Desiree Warner. I am going to label some of or identify some of the bones in the human skeleton. First, we're going to start with the nasal bone, which will be found here on the skeleton. Then we have the sphenoid, which would be here on Mr. Skeleton. We have the lacrimal. The lacrimal will be located right here. Then the ethmoid will be located right next to the lacrimal, further inside the eye's orbital. The zygomatic bone would be the cheekbone here. That's how I remember what it is. I refer to it as a cheekbone. The maxilla would be located here. And actually, no, the maxilla would be the lower jawbone, and the mandible is the upper. The frontal would be the forehead, and the vomer would be this bone inside of the nose cavity. Okay, so on the posterior end, let's turn my model around. On the posterior end, the mandible would be the upper lip area. Let me see. Quite not able to see the mandible from the posterior end of it. But then we have the occipital. Occipital would be located here. The peridial would be located at the crown here or here. And the temporal bone would be located on my model right here near where the earlobe would be found. Okay, so laterally, let's look at Mr. Model laterally, if he would stand still. Let me just turn him. Oh boy. Face him the other way. Lateral. That's much better. He doesn't fall. Okay. So lateral of the skull. The ethmoid would be again can only see inside here, and the nasal would be this bone, the frontal, the forehead, the occipital would be back here. The lacrimal will be right up front, right next to the nasal bone. The mandible would be here, and the maxilla. And this again is a different view, lateral view of the skull. I know I went through some of these descriptions before. Then we have the jawbone, which would be the maxilla, and I'm fast approaching 5 minutes, but I'm gonna get through this. The nasal, okay, And it's all the same for the lateral skull, the inferior skull, and the anterior skull. So I'm gonna jump a bit. In the interest of time, I'm gonna jump a bit to the vertebral column. And I'm gonna turn Mr. Model here again so we can see the back of him. Okay, so the atlas would be the very first bone that kind of wraps around the back of the neck, just below the occipital bone, and that's the atlas. Then the axis would be the very first bone after it. And what's next? The cervical vertebra. The cervical vertebra, I like to refer to, well, I remember which bones are in what order because I remember the numbers 7, 12, 5. And so the first 7 bones would be the cervical vertebra, and then the next 12 bones would be the thoracic vertebra, which would be, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then the thoracic would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then the lumbar would come down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then which brings us down to the sacrum here, and then of course the coccyx will be this piece, the very the tailbone. All right, and then we turn Mr. Model around to the thoracic area of the model, and quickly run through this again in the interest of time. The body of the sternum would be this piece. It's usually the entire row of the cartilage, but the manubrium of the sternum would be that first piece of the sternum. The false ribs, I would say, are these. The floating ribs are these. And the true ribs are these. I'll say the first 5, 6, 7, right, the first 5. And of course, there's a difference. These are called floating ribs for obvious reasons. They're not joined to anything in the anterior section of the model. And then the false ribs join each other in the anterior section of the model. All right, moving on to the clavicle. The clavicle would be here, one on each side of the shoulder. It's called, the collarbone, known to some as that. The humerus would be this arm bone. The radius, I will say this is the radius. This is the ulnar. And the scapular would be, let me turn the model around, this bone. All right, getting there. The wrist. So the capitate is the middle wrist, that bone. If you can hold his hand. Okay, you got it. So the capitate, I will say, would be this middle wrist. And then the humate, I will say, would be this bone. Ooh, yes, the humate, and then the humate, the lunate. The humate, the lunate. Then the scaphoid would this bone. The sesamoid, I'll say it's this bone, this first bone, and then the trapezium will be the bone top right next to the sesamoid. And then moving right along to the carpals would be these first row. The carpals will be all here. Oh, I'm sorry. The carpals are here, and then the phalanges will be the limbs of the fingers. The pisiform, the bone at the outer wrist. The pisiform, I'm going to show you on the model, would be that little bone extending. The trapezoid, I see it here again, and I'm going to trapezoid. Oops, he moved his hand. Okay, let me use this hand. The trapezoid is located, here we are, right here. Actually, no. Trapezoid is here. And I think the triquetrum would be located on the edge of the pinky finger. And where is he? Oh, here he is, over here. All right. So the ilium, going down to the pelvic girdle now, the ilium would be located in here. This is the ilium bone, and what it does, it functions to protect and hide the kidneys. The ischium. Ischium would be these circular bones under here. The pubic bone, these up front, the femur, the patella. Oh, I'm not sure if you saw that. The femur, the patella, the tibia, the fibula. And then last but not least, we're going down to the ankle and the foot. So we have the calcaneus. We have the cuboid. We have the intermediate cuneiform, which would be that bone. The medial cuneiform would be this bone. The lateral cuneiform would be this bone. Actually, no, this one. Right, so we have the medial, we have the intermediate, and we have the lateral cuneiforms all right next to each other. The metatarsals are these 5. And we have the navicular located right here. The phalanges are the toes. The talus is here. The ankle bone, actually. And I believe I've covered everything. Thank you. It's a little bit over time, but I wanted to go through all of the bones. Thank you. Bye-bye.